my developer journey. How did I get to where I am? Where did I start? What does it look like now that I'm here? I guess they're the main questions people are after. It's so windy today. Whose idea was it to start a vlog at the end of winter, beginning of spring? Every day has 4 seasons in Melbourne and spring is the windiest. And we're in spring. I don't know if we're officially in spring, but it feels like it. So, where am I now? Let's start at now. While the dogs stop for another sniff. Let's start at now and work backwards. So right now, I work as a developer advocate. What is a developer advocate? I feel like I need to cut in some kind of video created by somebody who knows these things better. There's many things. Comes under the bigger banner of developer relations. Essentially, I like to think of my role as sitting right on that border between the company I work for and the developers who use the product. I'm a software engineer that loves to interact with the community and wants to help developers solve their problems, essentially. I used to go to conferences and talk at conferences. I will help out on community forums to help people solve their problems. I create demos that demonstrate not just Auth0 things, but also how to implement Gatsby with Sanity's headless CMS. Whatever it is that provides value to developers. And then on the flip side, I provide value to Auth0 because I give to them insights into what it is that you need, what problems you're trying to solve. So it's so hard, traditionally, to get to speak to the developers of the products you use. For example, if 10 years ago you'd had a problem with something that didn't really work for you properly in Microsoft Word, I'm picking on Microsoft for no particular reason other than it's a well-known product. Let's go. Who would you talk to? As a general user of their product, not as an enterprise user. How would you talk to somebody at Microsoft and say, hey, how about this feature for Microsoft Word? Wouldn't that be cool? So that's what I do. I'm kind of that bridge. So I will find out what you're trying to solve, how we might be able to help you better, and I'll feed that back into our product team. That was a bit of a long rant. That's kind of my role as a developer advocate at Auth0. And how did I get here? So 20 years ago, I was studying at university. I actually wanted to do a web course, but there wasn't such thing. I spoke to a neighbouring university to where I was studying, and they had one, but they'd only just started it, so they were just finishing year 1. To transfer would have set me back, so instead I started my own business. I wouldn't really say it was a massively successful business, but it gave me the excuse to set up a server, Microsoft NT4. Do you remember Microsoft NT4? What's your favourite version of Windows OS? I haven't really used any version of Windows since 2002 or 3. Maybe even a bit before that. Started transitioning over towards Linux. But Windows NT4, I seem to remember liking that. It seemed to be stable. It was the server edition, whereas before that, Windows 95, 98, they were all the desktop editions. I digress. So I was able to do that. I was learning how to write dynamic web pages. At that point, most things were still static, and gave me a good opportunity to play with the technologies that I thought I would want to use in my day job. When I left university, I started working for a company in London, which was a digital design agency. So we would work on websites for various different companies. And when I moved to Australia, I started working at university. Actually, I was a tutor for a while at Melbourne University, and I did some IT work there. And then eventually I started getting back into the web dev side of things, and I started working for companies that are product companies as opposed to services companies. So the IT team, the web development team on site would actually be maintaining the software that their company produced and sold, whether that was a software as a service company or a on-premises application that their customers would use. But I was working on the same project every single day, and I started getting bored. I needed to challenge, I needed to change, and while the problems that I had to solve for that product were changing, I felt like I needed a different product to work on. So I ended up working at companies that had at product companies for anywhere from 5 to 13 months, I think, is the longest stint that I had at a product company. And then in 2007, I started working for a digital agency again. I was there for 3 years, and it hadn't really dawned on me at that point why I was working for longer periods at a digital agency than at a product company, but it's at that point that I discovered that I enjoyed the variety, the change, the challenge that came with a different project rather than just a different problem within the same project. So after that, I started contracting. I started working for an energy company, working on their customer management software side of things, leading that team, and my passion in security and privacy had always been around, but it started becoming more prevalent and something I could focus on more as a contractor, security consultancy, but also still doing a fair amount of technical analysis and business analysis and helping teams define how the software should be built rather than actually building the software myself. So threaded through all of this, that's my main career timeline, I started working a lot in the community. I was a PHP developer since 2000. I started out with Visual Basic ASP when I first started my job in London. Within 6 months I'd started using PHP, and I really enjoyed using that language. Still do. My focus is a lot more in front-end technologies nowadays. But when I first started using PHP in London, I wasn't really familiar or even aware of the underlying open source community that it was built on. I didn't really know what open source was. Till about 2003, when I wanted to meet more people in the developer community, and I found out about half a dozen people who caught up every month or so at a cafe. They would either chat about stuff they'd learned in PHP or web technology in general, or even non-technical things as well. And at that get-together, meeting, I suppose you could call it wasn't really that official, we talked about starting the PHP user group in Melbourne. So we did that, and along with probably about half a dozen, maybe 10 people to start with, we started the PHP user group. And at the same time, I started meeting people in other communities. The Perl community in Melbourne were running their next yet another Perl conference, YAPC, and that was in 2003. And I was talking to the organizer of the Perl meetup to say, is there any way we can add on some PHP-related content to the conference? And he mentioned that the Python organizer in Melbourne had asked them the same question. So we decided to create a 3-stream conference. One was purely PHP, one was purely Perl, the other one was purely Python. And the following year, that's when the Open Source Developers Conference in Australia was born. So that's my community background, and I really enjoy that community aspect, which has led me to obviously speaking at conferences. That's one of the ways that I loved to interact with people was through that networking aspect of conferences, and the only way I could go is if I was speaking, because then I would get a free conference ticket. And I got to a point where I was talking at maybe 5 conferences a year, both in Australia and around the world. And at one of those conferences, I met Joel Lord. Joel had just started, it's probably about 2015, 2016, around about then. Joel had just started as a developer advocate for a company called Auth0, who are a security company. And here I was at a PHP conference talking about security. And he said, if you really like talking at conferences and you're really into technology, you should get a job as a developer advocate for Auth0. We're looking for somebody in the APAC region. And I thought to myself, I enjoy the contracting. I know I'd enjoy the developer advocacy. I'm not sure whether my family's in a position for me to be away for more time. So I went back and I had a chat with my wife, and we had a bit of a chat about it. Didn't really make a decision. But Joel kept, every time he saw me at a conference or he would send me an email or we'd be talking on Slack, he'd say, so have you thought about getting a job at Auth0 yet? Eventually I just went through the interview process, mostly to shut him up, really. And then I got a call from HR saying, do you want a job? And the rest, as they say, is history. It's short history. It's been Actually, it's coming up to 3 years. It'll be 3 years in September that I've been at Auth0, which is a product company. And I'm still there because I'm not working on the product, I'm working on so many different things that keeps my interest going, and is what I love. And I'm still able to connect with the community, even during times of COVID. I can still connect with the community, I can experiment with new technologies, I can learn, I can share that learning. That's how I got here. That's my developer journey. I'd love to hear yours. Share yours in the comments below. Let me know why you're a developer, if you're a developer. Are you trying to learn to be a developer? Are you moving into the IT industry? What's making you do that? What's going on in your head right now? Meanwhile, I'm going to go and buy my dog some food. See you in the next one. By the way, did you like how smooth that transition was from the outdoor scene to the car scene? You never noticed, did you? Did you notice? So my battery might have died.